We all know that addictions have one overriding theme, and that is that there is some sort of trauma in the past that has triggered it. Today, in that very theme, we have an amazing guest on, Merrit Hartblay, who is the author of Lost Innocence, his story of addiction to recovery. Merrit is a therapist, a social worker, a chemical dependency counsellor. He talks about his own recovery, how he helps people now with his experience and his qualifications to gain a life of freedom. So stay with us. It's going to be a wild one, guys. I hope you enjoy it. Take it away. Let's get straight into the video. We've got Merrit Hartblay on. I hope I've not...
No, you said it good. You did. You did good.
Yeah, so you've actually got your first book that you released, I think it was in last August on Amazon. It was called Lost Innocence, Journeying Your Recovery from Addiction. And you've actually got a podcast as well called The Recovery Road, I believe. So I think just to kind of segue into this, if you could introduce yourself a little bit about your story for all the people that don't know about you, and we'll just take it from there.
Okay, so, basically, this September, I'll be celebrating 13 years of sobriety. So it's been quite a journey. Typically, I grew up in a household. Both of my parents were alcoholics. It was a tough thing I learned much later in life, but, it was the kind of thing where I escaped out into the schoolyards, most of the time to stay out of the house. So it was football, basketball, baseball, whatever it was, until it was too dark to play and then to come home. And pretty much, it was a tough upbringing because I saw, what alcohol was doing to my parents. I mean, I don't think they realized it at the time, but it became, a very tough place to grow up. Me and my sister, it was just me and my sister, so we kind of had to fend for ourselves a lot. But having said that, when I got old enough, to go away to college, it was an opportunity to get away from home. So I got a track scholarship to a state university here in New York, and took the opportunity to get away. And it was a good thing for me to get away from the home. Again, I realize now, as I go back over my sobriety, that I really can't blame my parents for anything. They were doing the best that they could do. But basically, what happened in college was, now this was in the early '70s, so you can imagine being on campus life in New York in 1972. It was a very, drinking age was 18. People were smoking a lot of pot, but I was very, very fortunate to have a really good track coach who we're friends to this day. And he kind of mentored me and took me under his wing. So I was able to focus on athletics and scholastics for almost 3.5 years. And it kept me focused for sure, because I saw what a lot of people were getting involved in: too much drinking, too much pot and stuff. So it was a big problem for them. And I kind of got guided the right way. So really, it was funny, I didn't really have my first drink until probably my junior year of college. And so that was a lot later in life. And so when I got out of college in 1976, coming back to New York City, it was kind of like being let out of being shot out of a cannon. So I'd like to say, without going into too much detail, I mean, the book really, my book, Lost Innocence, really talks about my whole story going back to when I was born up until the day that I got sober. And then a little bit after that. And it really talks about living comfortably numb for about 30 years. The thing that I realized, guys, was that I lived a good part of my life based on other people's expectations from me. And that's a huge pressure to have, where you wake up one day and you say, what happened? So that's what I did for 30 years. I got married because everybody around me was getting married, and I felt the pressure to get married. And of course, it really was what I wanted to do. So on the outside, everything looked good. I gave the appearance that I was doing the right thing, trying to be a good husband, but it didn't work. My first marriage ended kind of badly. I was young and didn't really know, what was going on, and walked away from that. And you know how it is. It's like sometimes you think if you move away, like I had an opportunity to move away from New York to Houston. So sometimes you think that when you move away, everything's going to be better. You're going to start all over. But you know what I learned? Wherever you go, you take yourself with you. So that was a big problem. And I went to Texas, and everything kept going back and forth, and the drinking got bad, and the drugging. But I really thought at the time that that's what everybody did. You worked hard, you partied harder, but it really wasn't working for me. So anyway, I kind of did that for a long time, and came back to New York. I was married to my second wife, and trying to be a good dad, trying to be a good husband, trying to be a good father, all that kind of stuff. But what happened was in 2002, I was working for a company called WorldCom. It was like one of the largest telecommunication companies in the world. And I was a sales manager for the company. And they rewarded performance with stock options. So I had a lot of stock options on the table. And what happened was, guys, literally, I was like, let's see, the stock price was, I had my stock options at the strike price of about 12. The stock was in the 60s. I was 30 days away from 100% vesting. And literally overnight, the company went chapter 7, chapter 11, lost everything. Pension, profit, my whole life was invested in the company. And literally overnight, I went from a 6-figure salary to unemployment. So you can imagine the drinking took off, things got a lot worse. And it was a bad time. It was a very, very bad time. And it was very dark for me. You know, I was trying to, juggle all the balls, trying to find different jobs so I could take care of the family, do all the right things. But what happened was all of a sudden the ball started falling and I didn't know what to do. And it got worse and it got a little bit worse. And to kind of fast forward, my son, he was in high school at the time and I would drive him up to school. I'd come home and by 8 o'clock in the morning, I was on my 4th drink, watching like the Little House on the Prairie on TV, worrying, why can't my life be like that? And it got worse. And I kind of was at the end of my rope. And, one day I came home and I was done. I wrote my last will and testament. I was having suicidal thoughts, but I think I would never do anything, but I was scared. I was scared. And I think it was the first time in my life guys, that I really prayed. And I prayed to God. I said, please help me because I don't know what to do. And by the grace of God, you know what? I found my way into recovery. I found my way into AA. I talked to a doctor, talked to a very close friend of mine, and I said, I need help. And I did. And that was like 13 years ago, September 24th of 2008. And, my life turned around because I began to realize for the first time, which I try to talk to I work full time now at an outpatient substance abuse and mental health facility here in Long Island. I teach at a school where people go to become drug counselors. I have a, small therapy practice. And I've learned now that, you have to really learn to love yourself, guys, right? You need to be able to look in the mirror and say, I love myself just the way I am. And I did, and everything changed. I went back to school and I became a drug counselor. And then I was working in an outpatient facility. This was in 2010, 2011. And then I decided that I wanted someday to do more, to become a therapist. And I went back to school in 2013 at 59 to get my master's. So it was a 3.5-year program, and I got my master's and graduated with honors. Came back to Long Island, and so I've kind of been, my mission in life today, guys, is when I was drinking and drugging, I was very selfish. It was all about, oh God, please help me, please help me. But once I got sober and started to look at life differently, it was all about, okay, God, and I'm not getting religious, guys. I'm getting very spiritual. It's okay, God, what can I do for you? So I've been on a mission, since I got sober to help people find a better life, to help people find peace of mind. And I started writing the book. It took about 5 years to finish the book. I was back in grad school. I had some more time. I finished it up. And I found an amazing family friend who I hadn't connected with in years, who she has her own podcast. And she's also been a 2-time best-selling author, Jess Brannis. And I went to Jess and sent her the manuscript, and she helped me publish the book. It came out last August on Amazon and became a number one bestseller and #1 new release. And the book's been doing great all over the world, actually, which is a blessing. I'm helping people. And then I said to Jess, I need to do more. I really want to do more. And I said, I'd like to do a podcast so I could get the message out every week. And she said, okay, let's set it up. So, Recovery Road, set it up. It became it's so close to your guys' name. I think there's a reason we're all together here. We're on the same mission. And my first podcast was in February. And so it's been a mission to just bring on speakers, bring on people, talk about substance abuse, mental health, wellness, self-care, to kind of help people realize that they can have a better life when they stop living for somebody else and start to live for themselves. So I hope I didn't ramble on too much about that.
No, that's actually very, very like what myself and Ryan's experience is, because we've been kind of like that ourselves. We've kind of lived all about ourselves, and I believe in a way through our pain becomes our purpose. that's something that I've always thought as well. Like myself and Ryan, we're all about helping people with eating disorders because we've been through it with yourself. It's obviously helping people through the addiction of obviously alcohol and things. And though they're very different in certain ways, there's that same thing there, as in there's been a trauma, there's mental health problems, and like an eating disorder, alcohol is an addiction as well. They're both addictions, so there's very, very similar stories there.
Yeah, no, I think there's like a spectrum of addiction in which no matter what the manifestation of that addiction becomes, there's certain similarities between them. And I know the trauma is a real big one, childhood trauma, just early life trauma, any sort of stress like that. And it was really interesting when you were talking about moving away to college and realizing that later on, wherever you move yourself and that mental state with you.
Yeah.
It doesn't just stay in the city. It's not like Vegas, okay? It doesn't just stay in
Right.
Vegas. But I did the very same thing when I
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
I did the very same thing when I was 20 years old. I had just kind of got out of the worst aspect of my eating disorder as far as the physical aspect of the eating disorder. I had weight restored. And I was still, unfortunately, I never dealt with any of the underlying feelings that I had been festering for the last 8 or 9 years that really were the development of my eating disorder in the first place. I never dealt with those. I never went to therapy. I thought therapy was for losers. I just wasn't willing to tackle any of those things. So I decided that by moving to Los Angeles, that I would somehow leave all those problems behind. And instead, I just encountered new problems. I became extremely depressed. I started going back into my eating disorder behaviors. I didn't necessarily lose a ton of weight like I did the first 2 times where I didn't have an extreme weight relapse. But as far as a mental relapse, I relapsed all the way. And I was over-exercising and my body just fell apart. And this was something I realized 2 years ago, that I wasn't actually any better at all. I looked a little better in the mirror, but I was still sick. And so I realized also, like you in your journey, that in the depths of it, when I was trying to really recover, that I was only doing it for myself. And I had all of these selfish, and it's kind of a young person thing too. I think a lot of young people are selfish at times. And I think to some level, young people deserve to be selfish because, it's that time of your life where you're figuring out who you are, all of those things. But I was always searching for a deeper purpose and I just couldn't find it. I didn't want to be selfish, but I was.
Right.
And thankfully, about a year and a half ago is where Tommy and I, who I'd known since the depths of my eating disorder in 2016, we kind of got talking about starting this podcast, Road to Recovery. And I realized that this was the opportunity to give back to other people and help them and not just try to help myself. And in that, talking to people like yourself, Merrit, who have been through these really dark situations, you're really kind of giving yourself a little bit of even more self-therapy just by talking to other people that have gone through similar experiences with addiction. So I think it's wonderful that you're starting your own platform with your podcast and your book and all these things to help other people realize that they're not alone and that, hey, all these experiences, though they may not be the same, we're all in a similar boat. And so I think that's a really admirable thing that you're doing. And by the way, Merrit, that's how you ramble.
And I'll tell you something. The podcast has really taken on a very interesting twist. Hopefully you guys are aware of how bad the fentanyl issue is here. It's a global issue, but here in the United States, it's really, really bad. And 200 people are dying a day from fentanyl because fentanyl is being laced in everything. Cocaine, heroin, marijuana, Adderall, all kinds of pills, and kids are dying every day. And so about a month and a half ago, I got involved with a group here called Appalled, APALD.net. And it stands for Association of People Against Lethal Drugs. And Diane Urban and Kathy Lawley, who were on my podcast a couple weeks ago, started the group because of the deaths of their children. And so I started meeting with them, got involved with the organization. We had a nationwide rally here last Friday in about 40 cities across the country. And what happened was I started talking people, and I realized that, these parents were hurting and needed to get their stories out. So I put a post up on the appalled and fentanyl awareness groups that I was going to dedicate my podcast for the next several months. So basically, what happened was, these started reaching out to these parents. And so for the next several, I had a mom on this week's show who lost her 13-year-old son to fentanyl overdose because he tried one Percocet and died. So it's a horrible thing. It's an epidemic.
Yeah.
This country knows where the fentanyl is coming in. It's coming in from China. It's coming in across the borders. Nobody wants to do anything about it. So I'm on a mission now to help these parents tell their stories. I mean, are you guys? Tommy, what's it like over in the UK? I mean, are you guys hearing anything about fentanyl poisoning?
I can't say I've actually heard much about it, to be honest, but I have heard about it in the States and things, but in the UK, no, it's very
Really?
been quiet about that.
Wow. Ryan, what about you? Have you heard anything about it?
Well, so I've heard of the fentanyl thing quite a bit. The other thing that I know is discussed a lot. So we've done a lot of podcasts with people in the chronic illness community. So people with neuropathic pain, various types of fibromyalgia, and it's very easy for these people to begin to abuse the opioids or other various drugs like kratom. Kratom's really big right now,
Absolutely.
and something that I've talked to my neurologist about. And kratom apparently is pretty addictive too. And so I haven't really dug into that as much. I know the fentanyl thing quite a bit, but there is a huge drug epidemic in general in the United States, whether it's pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical. And I don't think that we've been addressing it the right way. So I would be curious, Merrit, as to what you've been looking at as far as solving some of these people's problems, because it's so easy to get on all of this stuff.
Well, yeah. And, I think one of the biggest problems, and I'm not making any judgments, is that, doctors are a big part of the problem because, it's only up until maybe 15 years ago that medical schools started training doctors in addiction medicine. So, you go to a doctor and you tell him that you've got this pain or that pain, and, here's 20 pills, here's 25 pills. I think people that have chronic diseases or chronic illness, and I do work with a lot of them. We have special doctors that we work with, pain management doctors, and they can prescribe, a whole host of non-narcotic medications to help people with their pain. And I deal with pain people all the time. Cancer patients, I deal with, veterans and first responders that have a lot of PTSD. And, what happens is they come back from the war and they've got all these mental scars and they're addicted to drugs and alcohol. And all the VA does is shoot them up with psychotropic medications. So there are good doctors out there, and there are good treatment facilities that can help people, really deal with their issues, but not get them further addicted. I mean, my thing in working with people that have mental health issues, and mental health is such a huge part of this, 90% of the alcohol and drug addicts that I work with, have a mental health problem. And in this country, there's been such a stigma tied to mental health. So I think you have to treat mental health and substance abuse at the same time. And in regards to chronic illness, you need to work with specialized doctors. I mean, just to give you guys an idea, without going into detail, I have a new patient in my group, and he's got some PTSD, and he went to it, and we check on all the medications that our patients are taking before they come in. We can run a thing called iStop, which is a way that doctors can check to see every prescription you've been given. This guy had been to his doctor, let's say the beginning of June, and the doctor prescribed within 3 days over 300 pills of Klonopin. 300 pills.
Wow.
In just in a 2-day span, which is crazy. I mean, first of all, this is a psychiatrist who really hasn't probably spent more than 5 minutes with the client. That's, I think, is a travesty. If I'm a doctor and when we have new patients come into outpatient here, we do at least a 2-hour intensive, biopsychosocial analysis to really understand all their issues. Most psychiatrists, you go in, tell a psychiatrist you're stressed out, I have this problem, they're just going to write a script, charge you $300, see you in 30 days. So it's a problem.
It is a big problem. I actually would be really curious on your thoughts. I recently was watching a podcast. I can't remember with who the specific medical professional was, but they were talking about PTSD, depression, mostly PTSD associated with former military veterans and stuff like that who develop PTSD is fairly common. And they were talking about they've been doing studies with psychedelics such as MDMA for the treatment of things like PTSD. And I was curious what your thoughts were on that, because I'm sure you've seen some of, maybe not, they've been doing some studies recently, but I'm sure you've seen that in the news or online somewhere of people trying to use this for treatment of PTSD.
Well, you know what? I've seen it, and I'm just talking from me, guys.
Right. Of course.
My belief is that, if you want to really get to the heart of the matter, you don't want to just further screw up the brain chemistry.
Exactly, totally agree.
I think that, when I've worked with veterans and first responders that have PTSD, the goal is most of them have been addicted to something. So you have to get them clean and sober, and then slowly start to do the trauma work. I mean, we do specialized trauma work where we use rational related therapy. I mean, there's, EMDR, there's a lot of things that we can use trauma wise to slowly work with them. So I know it's being done out there, but my own personal belief is that by injecting more chemicals into the brain, you're not giving it the full ability to heal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So I'm actually on the same wavelength as you, by the way, Merrit, with this. I just find it really interesting, mostly because, never mind, I can't say that on here. but I'm really fascinated because I think what the theory was behind using things like MDMA or psilocybin, and I don't really know exactly how much dosage they were giving these people.
It's probably like microdosing. Yeah,
it's probably microdosing.
Yeah.
But the theory was that if that person is like in a willing state when they go into the trip, then they can have sort of this way of confronting those traumas, and then they come out of it, less manic, I suppose.
Right. But here's the thing. I really believe, that, when somebody's gone through, and I think everybody's probably experienced trauma in their life in some way, shape, or form, and they probably didn't know how to deal with it, so they push it away, right? But the addicts that I work with now, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, 20, 25 years later, it rears its ugly head. I believe that to deal with the trauma, like Ryan, it's true. You have to find a way to have the patient be able to recognize the trauma, but find healthy ways of moving away from it, like with tapping and things like EMDR.
That's something I'm big about. EFT, I do that quite a lot. I advocate for that for the people I coach with eating disorders. It's massive.
Yeah. So I think that, again, I believe that if somebody truly wants to work on their trauma, then you have to make sure you put them in the hands of really good, experienced people that are specialized in trauma. Because if you're not, you can really send somebody back into a dark place. You have to know exactly when to bring them out of it. But I'm not, again, this is just me, guys. I'm not a believer in using psychedelic drugs to help somebody walk away from a trauma, because it's still going to be there. It's, all you're doing is just kind of like fogging up the head a little bit, right?
It's basically like masking the problem, because what you really want to be working on is neurally rewiring those thought patterns and whatever that trauma was. For myself, personally, my grieving was everything about grief. I lost my mum in 1997. That started my eating disorder. Then my wife suffered ovarian cancer and miscarriages, so I had a relapse then. Then I lost my dad and I had another relapse. So similar to your kind of story, it was always traumatic events in my life that re-triggered my eating disorder and things. So working on those areas, knowing what your triggers are, and kind of healing that thought process is what takes you forward.
And I kind of want to go back really quick, Merrit, to the importance of actually loving yourself, because I know for me, really the manifestation of my exercise addiction and eating disorder and all of these different things was that at the heart of hearts, I didn't love who I was at the time. And I was trying to become perfect. And it just led into a dead spiral into basically the depths of hell for me. And I think that's at the root of it. I think that's the major problem that everybody, no matter what they're going through, needs to confront. And that does take into account confronting the past traumas that maybe have led to those feelings in the first place. And so kind of what I wanted to ask you based on that was, like, we talk about tapping and various things like that. Maybe you can kind of explain in a little more detail various strategies you've been using to work with people with their various addictions that you've worked with.
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things, there was a therapist that I learned a lot from and studied with for a long time. She passed away a couple years ago. Her name was Louise Hay. And Louise Hay wrote this book, You Can Heal Your Life. And it basically talks about, if you change the way you think, you can change your life. And part of that is about, instead of, we all grow up, I believe, with unhealthy coping skills and negative thinking patterns that we learn from our parents. We can't blame, but we learn from them and people around us. So what you have to do is, basically, one of the theories that I work with a lot is called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. You really have to help the people, the patients, rewire their brains to start thinking differently. We use things called affirmations, positive statements, that by using positive statements and doing gratitude lists, that you need to be able to look in the mirror and say, I love myself just the way I am. And it's very hard for a lot of people to do that. But Ryan, when you get to that place where, like, for example, when I work with addicts and they're working a 12-step program, part of that 12-step program is they have to make a list of people they've harmed and make amends to them. Well, I always tell my patients, your name needs to be at the top of that list, because unless you can forgive yourself first, you really can't forgive anybody else.
Absolutely.
So we really work through a whole process of motivational interviewing, CBT. I mean, it's all about helping the person, maybe for the first time in their life, take off the costume, take off the disguise, and say, like, this is Tommy, this is Ryan, this is who I am. I love me for who I am. And if you don't love me or like me, that's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. But most people get consumed in a lifetime about what other people think about them. And if you go through life like that, that's where addiction starts to kick in and rear its ugly head, right? And say, well, nobody loves me. I'm not good enough. Pour me another drink. You know what I mean?
We know that eating disorders are an addiction as well, but the difference with facing an eating disorder is your fear and your addiction you've got to face every single day, which is facing food. But for somebody with alcohol, you've got to avoid that. So what do you do to help people avoid triggers like alcohol because it's out it's in social settings, it's everywhere we go? How do you help them avoid those triggers when they might be going back?
So basically, what we do is, Tommy, to answer your question, is, if somebody knows that there are certain things that will trigger them, we have them identify their triggers. It could be watching a football game, watching a soccer match, seeing a certain movie, listening to certain music. What we do is, basically, in the very beginning, it's like staying away from those things. It's like people, places, and things, until you're strong enough to be able to do that. So it's basically taking somebody and teaching them for the first time in their life how to address, like I have my guys in group do, I'll say, list 5 triggers that you have. Okay, maybe one trigger is going to a wedding where people are drinking, or going to a sporting event. And then I say, well, okay, if you're faced with that situation again, what are you going to do? So I have 5 people that I can call, right? Or I just pick up myself and I leave. I don't put myself in that situation. The idea is that we've also told people that the shortest, most complete sentence in the language is the word no. You can tell people, you know what, thank you for the invitation, I just can't make it. Because it's about protecting yourself. Think about this, guys. How many people go through their life trying to please people, putting themselves in a situation, they're going to somebody's house for dinner. They really don't want to go because they can't stand them, but they're going because they have to go. So I tell people, you know what, the next time, don't go. Just say, thank you very much, I can't make it. So it's basically helping people here's the other thing. The one word that I tell my patients to take out of their vocabulary is the word expectations. Because if you live your life based on other people's expectations for you, it will come crumbling down on you, right, guys? Because every time you have an expectation for something to happen, 9 times out of 10 it doesn't happen. So what happens? You get a resentment, you get angry, you get pissed off, you start drinking, you start drugging, or you start eating more. Like if you're a food addict or if you're a gambling addict, you go back to all those things where you feel safe, right? So we have to really help people begin to realize that, you know what? It's about building healthy boundaries in your life. If you have a family member who's toxic, or a friend or somebody who's toxic, you have to make a decision to say, does this person really bring anything to my life that's positive? When I spend time with them, am I always feeling negative? Are they always telling me their problems? Well, maybe you shouldn't be around those people because they're not helping you feel good about yourself. So it's really a process. Tommy, when people come in with addiction issues, and you know what? Everybody's addicted to something, right? It could be food, it could be sex, it could be gambling, it could be it could be anything, right? What they do is they self-medicate because they can't meet life on life's terms.
Mhm.
So our goal is to help people realize that, you know what? If people are laughing at you or people making fun at you, guess what? It has nothing to do about you. It's them. It's them. So you have to learn that it's okay to be who you are. You have to be able to learn to love yourself, Ryan, before you can love anybody else. But a lot of times we grow up in a household where it's toxic, or our parents, if you grow up in a household where your mother and father argue all the time, or your
Mhm.
father, comes home
Okay.
after work and has 4 or 5 drinks. As you grow up, you begin to realize, well, I guess that's the way to deal with life, right? I come home from work and I have 4 or 5 drinks. Well, before you know it, that's not the way to deal with it. The idea is to talk about it. So it's a process, man. But I'm grateful to be able to, and oh, here's the other thing, guys. I really believe that it starts at a very, very young age. Most patients that I work with will tell me if they come into recovery at, let's say, 30, 25, 30, 35, whatever it is, when we have them start to look back at their lives, they realize that they had addictive behavior long before they picked up a drink or a drug. They felt
Mhm.
like they were on the outside looking in, right? They never felt part of a group, all those feelings. And if they would have went to their parents about it, the parents would have said, you know what, that's bullshit. Put on your big boy pants. It'll get better. That's not the answers, right? Tommy,
Mhm.
that's not the answer.
No,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
No, I think that's very true. I think that's kind of like the stigma with the mental health stuff, and hopefully it's starting to pick up because of the whole COVID thing that we just got through, and everybody basically realizing that a lot of our mental health are struggling even before the pandemic. It just kind of brought out the worst in a lot of people, and we know that at least for anorexia, and I'm sure this happened with
Yes.
people that have alcoholic addiction as well. That numbers probably skyrocketed. I know they did for anorexia and
Oh, yeah.
relapse like that.
Yeah. And I think if there's any good news out of COVID, the good news is that it forced families to start to spend time with each other.
Yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
I went out to a restaurant before COVID hit. I was just out for dinner one night, and there was a family of 4 sitting next to me, mother and father and 2 young kids. Nobody was talking to each other. They're all on their tablets or their phones.
Yeah.
I
Problem
wonder.
that's the thing about social media, and it's probably silly us saying this as we're talking on it, but it's kind of taken away from the social face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, I wanted to walk up to them and say, "Can I ask you a question? Why are you even here tonight? You should have just ordered takeout because nobody's talking to anybody." And some of these kids that have died because of fentanyl poisoning, when I talk to the parents, it's because they were trapped at home. They're using social media more. They go on
Mhm.
things like Snapchat. They meet somebody, says, "Hey, take this pill. It's really cool." This one kid said, "Okay, I'll take this pill." Does a video. I'm going to take this pill, and then 3 hours later, he's dead. So, if anything, we have to learn, from COVID, as a society, as a worldwide society, we have to learn that we have to value our lives. You have to wake up and ask yourself each day when you get up, guys. You have to say, am I happy with my life? Because if you're not, you have to ask yourself some serious questions. I had a guy in my group last month who was a cop, a New York City cop. And he became a cop because his father was a cop, his grandfather was a cop, so the blood ran
Yeah.
blue, right?
Mhm.
He never wanted to be a cop, and a lot of cops drink. And his drinking problem got really, really bad. And so to the point where he had to go inpatient rehab to get better, came to our outpatient facility, started doing the work. And one day he said, you know what? I'm done. I don't want to be a cop anymore. Turned in his papers at 54 years old. They said, well, what did you want to do? I said, I always wanted to be a lawyer, but my parents told me, no, you're going to be a cop. So at 54 years old, he went back to college to finish to get his bachelor's, went to law school. At 57, graduated from law school, got a small, got a job with a small law firm here in Long Island, and he was the happiest he'd been his whole life because he realized he wasted a lifetime living his life to please everybody else. So I think anorexia and eating disorders and all these addictions all come together because the person inside never got a chance to be right. Ryan, you never got a chance to be the person you wanted to be. Yes, or am I wrong?
It's really interesting because for me, I feel like my story it's probably very similar to most people's stories that develop some sort of like addictive behavior. But on one hand, I never had any of these issues with my family. I am one of the luckiest people in the world where my family is like extremely loving to a point of borderline, maybe too loving.
That can
With,
happen.
but I feel like personally, I think I just put all of these things onto myself
Yeah, you're a
because of
perfectionist, really.
so yes, but I think because of the era that I grew up in, kind of the emergence of social media and the internet, by really investing myself in these personalities and the idea of fame and wealth and all of these things that are very perpetuated even more so now because of how big social media is compared to like when I was growing up in the late 2000s.
Right.
I think that it was that sort of unrealistic expectation, which isn't even really an expectation other than when you put it on yourself, that led me to developing maybe a predisposition that I already had to being a perfectionist and pursuing all of these things and trying to discover my purpose in life, but going about it the completely wrong way and realizing that there is no right and wrong way of living
No.
your best life and being the best you, but living in a world where it's so perpetuated now to what is right and wrong via the internet. So I think for me and a lot of children today, regardless of if they have that sort of family family issue, this just compounds it even more.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ryan. And again, I'm not judging people, but I think
Yeah.
that the family unit is kind of broken down. I know a lot of parents don't have their fingers on the pulse of their kids. No middle school kid should be vaping marijuana or doing drugs. I mean, there's totally been a breakdown. When my son was growing up, he was outside playing football, outside in the schoolyard, riding his bike. He was not sitting at home in front of the computer for 6 or 7 hours. I think that, families, parents, I think need to take a greater role in their kids' lives. And these days it's hard, right? Because maybe it's only a one parent household or the grandparents are raising the kids. So I think that, again, not judging parents, but I think if they took more of an active role in their kids' lives, then the kid might not be left to find that through social media. You know what I mean?
I totally agree. And the problem along with that too is like my mom's a first grade teacher and she sees kids now more than ever who come into the classroom and have diagnosed anxiety or ADD or some sort of social disorder that she's never seen like previously in her career. And she also sees the fact that a lot of these kids their parents basically push these like technology devices like iPads or iPhones in their faces at younger and younger ages as sort of a babysitting device so that they don't have to be there for them. And I think that really plays a role in their psyche and the development of their psyche as they grow. And it's because they're so young and so impressionable that their brain's like a sponge, man. So by the time they're my age in their early 20s, the potential for being really, for lack of a better term, messed up is exacerbated.
I talk about it in my book. When my son was captain of the high school football team in our town where we were living, and he came to me one day and he goes, "Dad, the guys on the team aren't taking alcohol and drugs seriously. Will you come and talk to them?" And I was early in my sobriety, and I said, "Trevor, if I go in and talk to your friends, they're going to hear my story and they're going to think, oh, your dad was this alcoholic, deadbeat, whatever." He goes, "I don't really care if we can help one kid." So I talked to the principal of the high school, and I started going into all the health classes once a month and talking about drugs and alcohol and about life. And Trevor would come out of his class and sit next to me, and I knew all these kids, right? So now all of a sudden now it's like I'm talking to all these kids about life, about being able to feel your feelings, be who you are. And they started writing these letters to the teacher, and the teacher sent me the letters. And the letters were like, Mr. Hartblay, I've been smoking pot since I'm 10. I can't talk to my parents. I've been drinking since so and so. And I got all these letters, and I started realizing that so many kids are lost at a very young age. And if you don't bring them up knowing that you're not going to punish them, but help them live their dreams, support them, they're going to get lost very, very young. And, you know, if a kid, like I have a lot of kids that were trying to get off smoking pot, the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 28 years old. So if you're smoking pot at 10, 12, 14 years old on a continual basis, guess what? Some of that brain damage cannot be reversed. You're going to have short-term memory loss, long-term memory loss. So if a kid is smoking pot at 12 or 13 years old, or if a kid is acting out and the parents don't see it, that's a problem. And then the schools need to take a greater role. You know, I worked in a high school for years as a social worker, and a lot of these kids were having trauma, but the school didn't know how to handle it. It's like, send him to the dean's office. He's just acting out. He's a bad kid. But these kids were truly having panic attacks and truly having trauma. So I think schools now have, you know, trauma informed systems of care. But I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I think you guys will both agree that if the schools, if the parents could really identify things much younger, like, let me ask you a question, Tommy. When you were a young kid, were you able to talk to your parents about everything that bothered you?
Yeah, it was actually my grandfather who was my mum's dad. I used to tell him everything. He was a World War II hero. He used to tell me things about that he wouldn't tell the rest of the family. But I could tell him absolutely everything. And I think I lost him the month before I lost my mum, and it was his actual death that really led me down the path of destruction, basically. And then my mum died the month after. So not having him and being able to tell him things actually was the biggest problem that actually caused my eating disorder.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I have a lady in my group now. She's 45 years old. She's just now dealing with the grief and loss of her mother who passed away 20 years ago, but she never dealt with it. And if
Yeah,
you don't do
totally.
grief, if you don't do, yeah, if you don't do grief counseling, it's like a volcano that's slowly erupting inside of you, right?
I've never done grief counselling, to be honest. It's something I've always wanted, but I've never been able to do it, and I've had to like really work on myself through education, learning like techniques on how to cope with things. And I've never had any type of medication or real therapy, what you would call it. I did have eating disorder therapy, but it was just basically putting me on a scale and weighing me. So that's nothing, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's all about self-love. The question
That's
is,
exactly it. It's
you know,
getting. I think it's really hard to love yourself, but to begin with, to at least like yourself, that's a big step forward, at least.
yeah, I have a lot of guys that can't look in the mirror and say, I love myself just the way I am. They have a hard
Yeah.
time doing that. I mean,
Mhm.
Ryan, can you do that today?
I have to do it every day. That's like something I've started doing was that very thing. Because I mean, it's not like flipping a switch. It's like constant work. I mean, I think you would agree that for people that come in to see you, it's not like they're going to go one session with you and the
No,
people
no,
the
no,
way you work and it fixes
no.
all the problems. But the problem is we live in such such an instant gratification universe now that
Yeah.
people want this
Want
instant.
want it
And
yesterday.
Right,
this is probably why they gravitate to drugs and then abuse the drugs, because once you gain tolerance to certain medication, you need more and more to get the same effect. I mean, it's the same thing with addiction, right?
right,
So, but I think that's part of the extra problem we have today is like we live in the instant gratification society, and we're always looking for the next dopamine hit, and it's
right,
really hard to achieve what we really need to achieve when we're just doing that instead of doing the work.
right. And an understanding about the neuroscience and stuff, it's all about the dopamine. But what happens is with
Mhm.
addicts, the drugs and the alcohol that they've been taking, the dopamine that's been released is so much stronger than what the brain can produce on its own, that
Yeah.
literally they hijack their brain and shut part of their brain down. So now when they stop drinking and drugging, the brain is still searching for that dopamine. That's why cross addiction is so bad. Like, they stop drinking and drugging, but now they go to the convenience store and they buy one scratch off ticket. And before you know it, they're at the casino blowing a whole month's salary, because gambling, drug addiction, it's all the same thing, right? So you're right about that instant gratification. We have to teach, part of our goal is to teach people to take it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one step at a time.
Replacing that addiction with something positive, really.
Yeah, it's to really, it's a process, but I have really seen miracles over the last 15 years in working with people and seeing their lives change when they finally surrender. Here's the other thing: it's like when we say the word surrender. Like, I played sports my whole life, and when you surrender, it
Yeah.
means you give up, right? No, we have to teach them that you surrender to win. You
Mhm.
don't surrender to lose. You surrender. I give up. I can't do this anymore. I need help, right? Asking for help is such a positive thing. But guys, tell me, do you think that most people think asking for help is a sign of weakness, right?
Sadly, in society, it's looked at that, especially for males. You should just kind of toughen up. You should just get on with it. And I think that that's why me and Ryan are here in the first place, is to kind of end that stigma that surrounds that, and hopefully show that men can suffer with these things as well.
Yeah, I think the other stigma with that, or maybe not the stigma, but the problem with that is maybe not necessarily they feel weak by asking for help, but they're in a denial state of, oh,
Yes.
I don't need help. I can do. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a loss of
I
control.
was there
Yeah.
for 8 years.
Yeah.
So
Well, and we have to, and it's getting, what it comes down to again, it's feeding yourself all that negative talk for such a long time. So
Yeah.
maybe you're feeding yourself negative talk, and then people around you, maybe you're not lovable, you're not good enough. So you hear all these things, and you know what? If you think negative thoughts all the time, that's the reality you will experience. So we
Manifesting
try to get
itself
people
there.
right. So you have to start to think positive. When I do affirmations with my patients every day in group, you know people love me. Amazing things happen to me every day. I attract good loving people in my life, as opposed to them saying nobody loves me, bad things happen to me all the time. You both will agree, right? I mean, Ryan, if you keep thinking negative stuff all the time, negative stuff's going to happen, right?
well, I will say this. I've had a lot of bad things happen to me that are mostly brought on by myself. But at the end of the day, the way I've kind of twisted this in my mind is instead of saying like, man, all this crap has happened to me. Why was I so stupid? Like, why did I do this? Why did I do that? You were such an idiot. Instead of just like saying those things all the time, which I've done, uh, what I do now is I think of, look at all the experience that I've gained at 25 years of age that so many people will not have, sometimes never. But
Mhm.
look at all the experience I've gained. I'm now a wiser person than I was yesterday and the day before. And for that, I am eternally thankful, because I know people that are in their 50s or 60s. I look at some of the things my father goes through, and they still are not able to get
Right.
over or get past some of these past traumas in their life. And
But that's
so
a
I think you really got to look at it as, look, bad shit happens, but look at all the experience you gain from this bad shit that you can turn into good. It's like the saying, you learn more from failure than you do from success.
That's
correct.
exactly it.
Correct. And I tell my patients, no, regardless of what you're addicted to, that how many people have a chance to live two lives in one lifetime once you make
Mhm.
that decision to, here it is. Here's the thing that happens to most people. There's two tapes playing in their head every day. One tape is playing, oh my God, I should have done this 6 months ago. I should have done this 5 years ago. I should have done this last week. I should have done. The other tape that's playing is, oh my God, what's going to happen next week? What's going to happen 6 months from now? What's going to happen
Mhm.
next year? So if you're living in the past and living in the future, you're not living today. I always tell them, if one foot's in the past and one foot's in the future, you're peeing all over the present, right? Because you're not giving yourself a chance to live today. So, Ryan, most people never get a chance to really live life one day at a time because they're caught up in the past and they're caught up in the future, right? It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, I've suffered 2 major heart attacks. I was in a coma as well,
Wow. Wow.
months due to my eating disorder. And I woke up out that near death experience, and I knew that I was here for a reason, to help people. And that has been my purpose. And I live every single day happy and knowing that I'm actually here for a reason. And I enjoy every day. Every day is a gift. And I feel that that's what it should be.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's not about religion for me. It's about spirituality. I
Yeah,
grew up in
I'm
a
religious, but yeah, I mean, everybody's different.
everybody's different. I mean, no, for me, listen, it's when you come into recovery in a 12-step program, people see it's the God of your understanding. It's not about
Yeah.
religion. It's because there's hundreds of man-made religions, but spirituality is in the soul. It's like
Mhm.
it's getting in touch with who you are, and then realizing that if you believe in God, whoever you believe in, there's a plan for you. And maybe you had to go through all that bad shit to come out on the other side to finally do
Exactly.
something good with your life, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hate to say it, but so as someone that admires comedy, and a lot of comedians are probably some of the most tortured people
Oh,
on the
yes.
planet. And I always was like, man, I don't have a very terrible story because I grew up, I had this amazingly loving family. God damn it, that sucks. Like, what am I supposed to do? And now I have this story. So in some ways, like I said, you kind of got to take the situation, flip it on its head, and look at it for the positives you can get out of it. There's always a silver lining.
Right. And I always say, if in the course of your day, if something starts to upset you or something gets you pissed off, you got to like take a time out and ask yourself, what's really going on right now?
Mhm.
Because when you get angry at something, it's like you're 80% of the problem. It's not what the person's doing to you, it's how you respond to it, right?
Mhm.
So you kind of have to take a time out and say, why am I getting so upset? And if you start to do that, you're going to realize you'll start to laugh and say, why did that even bother me in the first place? Why did I waste all that time being upset about something that really is stupid?
Yep. That's how it always is. But I mean, man, we covered like quite a bit of stuff during this podcast. So I'd love to do a part 2 with you sometime down the line, because I think that
Definitely,
this is
yeah.
a message that can't be hammered home enough.
Yeah, and if you guys are okay with this, because we're so common, I mean, Road to Recovery and Recovery Road, I'd love to get with you guys offline. I'll message you guys. I'd love to have you on my podcast so I can
That'd be
talk more
fantastic.
about your stories.
Would love to. I
That would
would
be a
love to.
pleasure.
I mean, if there's one thing I love doing, it's being on camera and talking. So,
Hey, yeah.
but please tell people where they can find your book again, and all of the other sources where you're at, your podcast, stuff like that.
Yeah. So you can go to my book, Lost Innocence: My Journey from Addiction to Recovery, is found on Amazon.com in both paperback and Kindle version. In fact, my producer and I just finished recording the audiobook, which will be out probably in a couple of weeks.
Brilliant.
And then my podcast, Recovery Road, you can find it on every podcast platform. You can go to brannisenterprises.com, Be the Voice Podcast Network, and you'll find Recovery Road there. And I'm grateful to have met you guys. I have a feeling that we're going to be doing a lot of work down the road with each other. It's not a one and done thing, for
Well, I
sure.
appreciate it. It's been great speaking to you, and I'll get the links off you, and we'll put them down in the description for everybody to find.
Okay,
I really
great.
appreciate it, Merrit. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, guys, listen.